Welcome to What Brought You Here Today, an interview-style mental health podcast that focuses on real experiences and how we navigate and move through them. The guests on this show provide personal and professional insight at times and come from all walks of life. Not all of the guests work in the mental health field, and they've all chosen to be brave and vulnerable while sharing parts of their story with you. Please keep your own mental health and well-being in mind while listening. Welcome back, everybody. Welcome to What Brought You Here Today. I am your host, Ryan. I am joined by Brooke again for our second recording. This is going to be so much fun. Today, we are going to be talking about all things boundaries. And we do have some questions that were taken from Instagram, so we'll get to those too. But Brooke, if people haven't listened to your first episode, why don't you just give a little bit of your background?
Yes, so I'm Brooke. I'm a mental health therapist in Minnesota. I am EMDR trained and certified. I work with millennial and Gen Z women who are looking to address anxiety and trauma and break some of those generational patterns. I also have my own podcast called Coloring Outside the Lines. And I think that's all the thing.
We'll tag all your social medias and your podcast and the previous episode in the show notes for this episode, which will come out later towards the end of the year for season 3. But let's jump into boundaries. I love talking about boundaries.
We love a good boundary.
What is a boundary?
A boundary is a limitation that you can enforce yourself. That is a way to protect the things that are important to you. In my opinion, that is how I would define a boundary.
Yeah. Simple, easy.
Yep.
To the point.
We don't need to complicate it. It is like a fence around your yard. You protect your yard, your kids, your pets, your toys with your fence.
Yeah. Maybe let's just take some of these questions as we go. So maybe starting with family. How can we start talking about boundaries or setting up boundaries with family? I know you and I
think one of the
dealt with this in our own family.
Yeah, I think one of the biggest things is realizing where there needs to be boundaries was the first thing for me. Going to family events and being around people who have different views, different personalities used to really take a lot out of me. And I would dread going and then being like, oh my gosh, when can I leave? And to me, that was like the first indicator that I needed boundaries. And so figuring out what about those situations didn't work for me, because a boundary is not you change this, you behave this way. It's more about what I can do in a situation. So boundaries for me might be, if somebody brings up a topic I don't want to talk about, I will say I don't want to talk about it, or I'm going to go for a set amount of time. Those are things that I can control.
Yeah. I think that's the really key piece here, is that boundaries are about us and not necessarily about the other person.
It would be really nice if we could be like, hey, you do this different and it's going to make me feel better. I have found doing that does not work and just pisses people off.
Same. Yeah. So the boundaries are there to protect and preserve our well-being, the well-being of our children, whoever it may be, but it's really about us and what we see fit or like best to keep our mental health and our feelings and emotions.
And I think the other piece that people miss out on a lot is that we only set boundaries with things that we care about. And so if I don't care about a relationship, I don't care if you rub me wrong and then we just never talk again, or I never go around you again. But I set up boundaries because I'm trying to maintain something.
Yes. Yes. Why don't we talk about that part more?
Yeah.
I feel like that's the part that gets missed.
Yes. And because I think people hear, even if we set a boundary saying, if we talk about this subject, I'm going to excuse myself from the conversation. I think the other person often hears us telling them that they are the problem and that they're doing something wrong. And that's not the case necessarily. It's more about, I don't have the capacity for this, but I still want to maintain a positive relationship with you. And so I'm not going to put myself in a situation to have a negative experience with you if I can help it in any way.
Yeah. So one of the questions that we got was how to handle close family members who don't respect boundaries, even when you've asked them to.
Mhm.
How do we navigate that?
With a lot of emotion. I think specifically, like when people look at me and my experiences with boundaries, people look at me and think, oh, she's just emotionless, or she doesn't care. She can set these boundaries and she walks away and doesn't care about the impact on other people. When in reality, having to set a boundary is so hard emotionally for people, because it would be really nice to believe that everybody is just in tune with what we need and can like read into that and be like, yeah, of course you want me to do this or you need me to behave this way. Absolutely. I would love to do that for you. It has never worked out that way in my cases. It's more about there's a lot of grief that comes with it. There's a lot of self doubt and questioning. Is this the right thing? Am I making a big deal out of nothing? Am I being too dramatic? And having to really affirm for myself why I'm setting a boundary and why I'm maintaining it. Because when you get pushback, it seems to be like, oh, I'm just going to throw in the towel. I'm just not going to deal with this. And it doesn't do anybody any good. It just creates resentment and walls in relationships, which is not the goal when we have relationships.
Yeah. I often explain boundaries as this amazing things for yourself, but it's going to make everybody around you uncomfortable. And that you have to sometimes treat a boundary the way that you would treat setting a limit with a child is that you have to keep reinforcing it because it gets really confusing when you let the boundary down. And then you try to put it back in place and you let it down again. And you put it back in place and you let it down again. It is really confusing for the other person to figure out what the boundary actually is and what you're trying to accomplish by doing this.
I try and keep in mind too when you're like reinforcing those boundaries that it's probably new for that other person too to be hearing this thing. And so even though it gets frustrating to repeat yourself, which is what I tell my husband all the time, don't make me repeat myself. It's important for those relationships and it's important to keep that like feeling of frustration in check because again, it is new for people. It's not their default, it's not their boundary. And so they just might need our reminder, not in a you crossed my boundary kind of way, but more in a hey, remember, this doesn't make me feel good. So I'm going to walk away or I'm going to take care of myself when this comes up type of explanation.
Yeah. I think as we're talking it out a little bit more in this question particularly, I think oftentimes people and or parents especially don't actually understand what the issue is. What are you trying to set the boundary around? And I think that also can have a lot of feed the resentment and bring more of the negative side to it when you don't actually explain why you're doing this. It should be assumed because you're my parent, you should just be able to tell that I'm like pissed off at you for having these kind of conversations. Or when I leave a room, that should be a sign that I'm annoyed and don't want to be here. But no, we actually care about people, but not sometimes maybe not that in tune.
And I think that's a lot of what I see in the people that I work with too, is that you can be really clear about your boundary. You can be really clear about how you're feeling or the experiences that you've had, or even why you're setting a boundary. And the person that you're explaining it to might not, and for those not watching, this is in quotation, get it. Like they just might not be able to understand your experience. And so you can say, hey, you did this thing and it made me feel really bad. And so I just would prefer that we don't do this thing anymore. And they can continue to say, well, I don't get it. I don't get why that hurt you. That shouldn't hurt you. All of these things. And so if they don't understand where you're coming from, if they don't believe your experience, you're likely to have that same conversation over and over again with that person about that same boundary. And if they don't want to get it, if they don't have the emotional maturity to get it, they're not going to. And so there has to be a level of peace that you make with yourself and the boundaries that you're setting, knowing that people are going to have judgments, people are going to have opinions about what you're doing, and you still have to act in your best interest.
Yeah. I think as you're talking about this, another question just came in of how to set boundaries and not let others walk all over them. And I think that's the piece is being able to explain it or make peace with the fact that they might not have the emotional maturity or capacity to understand it.
And making peace with somebody not having the emotional maturity or the desire to understand it, that is so much grief. That is so much sadness. That is like a dark reality that you then are walking into, which a lot of people don't want to do. And I don't blame them. However, I think it's very hard to live a life that you enjoy and are happy with if you don't set boundaries, if you don't advocate for yourself, if you don't stand up for yourself. And so choose your heart, choose the quote unquote negative emotions that you want to deal with or not deal with. Like you get to choose. It's your life. Just do so with your eyes open.
Yeah, I think it's really, especially like I often have this conversation with my husband of what is worth me putting myself in a situation for, especially when it comes to my family. And this is also like very interesting timing that we're having this conversation as the 14-year anniversary of my dad dying is coming up in a few days. And like the boundaries that I've had to set with my family since almost since that moment, since he passed, has been really difficult and messy and frustrating and beautiful and all of these things. And I've really had to learn over the past 14 years that this is 100% about me. But guys, for those of you listening, like I'm 14 years into this and sometimes it's hard. Like I'll get a text or something will happen and it sends me in this spiral and it's now we got to start to rebuild the process, but not from scratch anymore because I've been pretty clear, but it's taken a lot of time and effort and energy and tears.
And boundaries with grief are so interesting because as much as, and I can't speak for other countries, but as much as Americans want to pretend that we like, it, we suck at dealing with grief. We suck at
Yeah.
acknowledging it. We suck at letting people do grief how it feels right for them. Like we expect people to follow a very specific process for grieving. You have this amount of time. You're meant to do it in this way. You're meant to do these rituals. And when people don't do that, we are so quick to tell them that they are wrong or that they need to do it differently or they're making themselves feel bad. We're so opinionated in general, but specifically around grief, which is, in my opinion, one of the most difficult emotions I've ever processed, dealt with.
Mhm.
The judgment, all the things. I don't know.
Yeah. I think too, is there a little bit of room for some grace or patience around why they don't have the emotional maturity or capacity? Are they the Did they also lose someone in this journey? Did they also like something happen to them that setting the boundary is going to be a little more difficult for them right now? And maybe in a year, 2 years, it'll get easier as they process some things too.
I think that's the other hard part about boundaries too, is those of us setting boundaries are likely in the self growth journey, the trying to make ourselves feel better, make our lives more in line with who we are. And when people in our lives are not on that same path or that same trajectory, it gets frustrating and it's hard. It would just be nice if we were all working on ourselves and trying to improve ourselves, make this world a better place. And not everybody is going to do that.
Right. Right. Let's shift gears to one of these other questions about how to navigate parenting differences when it comes to setting boundaries with your children. What are your thoughts? We both have kids.
My husband and I were really intentional about having a lot of conversations before we had kids. And we have a 2-year-old right now. And so, like, up to this point, a lot of the things that we have talked about have been covered. And so we've been on the same page with a lot of different things. The little in the moment things, I try to remind myself. Sometimes I'm a little too quick with my tongue. But I try to remind myself not to talk about things that I don't like in with regards to the way that he's parenting or handling a situation in front of our child. I try and set that boundary for myself because I don't want our child to look at our relationship and think that undermining each other is okay or that mom is always right or we always default to mom. I don't want that to be the impression that I give my child. I want it to look like my husband and I are on the same team. We're playing by the same strategy book. And so I just try and make a point to have those conversations with my husband later that same day to move forward. So that way it doesn't build resentment. And that way I can try and understand why he approached the situation a certain way compared to how I wanted him to approach it.
Yeah. I feel like this question isn't necessarily about boundaries. I think it's more of the communication aspect around, which
Mhm.
maybe by default does enforce and set up some boundaries, but the communication needs to be there so that you can set the boundaries and the limits, especially when it comes to your child. Because, like I was saying earlier, it is very confusing when it is not consistent for them.
Okay. And you don't want one parent to be the good parent, one parent to be the bad parent. One parent's always enforcing things, the other is not. It's not great for any of the relationships in that situation.
And I think then there can be some resentment or frustration around. I think it goes, more into the like the primary parent or the one who's doing the majority of the parenting and always just falls to them by default, which is exhausting. That's a
Yes.
lot. That's a heavy load to carry. Um, and I think it really depends. This question specifically says around screen time and family. Those are two very individual, family specific things. For example, we are a family that uses screen time. I have no shame. None.
It's a tool a lot of times that can be hard to have a full-time job and parent and do all of these things. And there's ways to do it responsibly. It's not like putting your kid in front of a TV and never interacting with them or letting the TV raise your kids. I mean, there's a time and a place.
And I think I was telling you before we started that I had a play date with this mom from daycare and she was making a comment about judging. And I was like, I don't judge it. Like we have really built a life where Noah has really joined our lives naturally. We haven't done too much to accommodate her. We've really just fit her into our lives. And a screen time is part of that. We want to go out to dinner or out for a drink. Like it's okay if she's on her iPad for an hour. We still interact with her during the time that we're there. It's not like we're completely ignoring her and just using this as a babysitter while we're right there, which I think is the bigger assumption maybe around screen time.
And people have a lot of judgments about kids with screens out in public. It's okay, you don't want my kid to have a screen. You're going to judge me for that. But you're also going to judge me if my kid is moving, making noise,
Right.
talking. What is the goal here? My kid is not going to be a mini adult because that's not healthy. And that's not my expectation for them. And again, there's no winning in that situation.
Right. They're still human beings. They are still people who need to get up and move around and interact with the world. And also, it's no different than us sitting across from our partners with our heads down on our phone. That's my soapbox of screen time, which I could go on and on about forever. But I
I
think
think the
go ahead.
I think the question about boundaries with family members is an interesting one too. And my husband and I are ebbing and flowing with how we handle that too. So I'm curious your response to that, how you do that.
I don't even know. I want to be the person or the therapist who has this really well thought out answer that makes sense for a lot of people, but it doesn't. Boundaries are so hard I think with family and especially with like in-laws and other like your spouse's family, because I don't get to set the boundary with my mother-in-law, how it works. My husband and I have had a lot of conversations about some of this boundary stuff because my family is like not super involved. They're very distant, living their own lives, doing their own things. My husband's family is very involved, which is much appreciated and great. But sometimes I often feel sometimes that there may be an overstep, and this is a me issue. And and, and I've actually worked on this a lot in my own therapy. This is a me issue because by default, I am not used to receiving that same kind of attention. And I think when it comes to kids, particularly and like family around kids, my family is pretty respectful. I think our biggest issue is like gifts and like toys and buying things for Noah and giving her things all the time. I have a really hard time with that. Like, she doesn't need anything. She has everything she could need. Please stick to the list for holidays, which is very difficult for some members of our family. That's usually where a lot of our issues come from is I don't want more things in my house. But it's just, we just have the conversation of this is who she is. This is just like how she operates. And at this point, it's just on me to figure out how to navigate that. And I think we'll keep doing that as Noah gets older and Noah can start to voice her opinion more of, I don't like these things. I don't want these things. I don't need these things. Versus me just like getting pissed off about more toys in my house. That was a really long answer. But yeah, I just think that the communication piece just needs to be there. And I don't think anyone has a perfect family dynamic individually or when in-laws are involved. There's too many moving parts. There's too many opinions. There's too many thoughts. There's too many emotions and people's like feelings to navigate that. All you can do is just keep communicating with your partner about how it makes you feel and at least get the validation and acknowledgement from them. Your feelings are still okay. We just might not be like, you just might not be able to control what's going on out here.
Right.
Which is really hard.
Yeah. That control thing, that's so big for so many of us that it just, and to be fair, people can like overset boundaries too as a way to protect themselves and have a lot of control. And it's important to be conscious of both ends of the spectrum too with that. Like, needing so much control compared to giving away all control and what you can do and what you can't do. It's a mess. It's a mess.
Yes. And I think maybe just some disclosure around this question. My best friend is the one who asked this question, and they're a mixed race family, which the cultural aspect alone had a whole new layer or multiple layers of navigating two different cultures, two different countries. They don't live in
Mhm.
the United States. So there's also like that living in a different country with parents in two different countries and just a lot more moving parts, she's going to be listening to this, and we have these conversations a lot in real life, and it always comes back to communication of like, how are you two talking to each other to show up the best that you can for each other and for your child?
And it's important to have a partner who can have these conversations with you and isn't willing to just be like, well, I feel this way. And if you can feel that way and it's valid and I'm still not going to listen to you, it's important that your partner, the person you're doing these parenting decisions with, wants to be a team with you, not just wants to have their way. Because I know my husband and I have navigated that too of not like this thing and it's important to you and I can tolerate it. Having different conversations about that. Like you don't always have to agree necessarily. You don't want to be put in a situation where you're uncomfortable or feeling unsafe. There's all of these like really fine lines to walk with this.
Yeah. What does it look like to overset a boundary? How does that impact us?
I think oversetting boundaries looks like only doing things or being in situations where you have complete control, where you're removing a lot of the variables like people or different situations, going places, leaving your house, oversetting the boundaries as a way to protect ourselves. In turn, then hurts us because we're not having some of those things that we need to be well balanced humans, like connections with people. Humans were meant to be in connection with people and novel experiences, which give us different perspectives on life and help us grow and understand, show ourselves how adaptable and resilient we are. It's really a way to insulate ourselves from anything in life. It almost freezes us.
Yeah. Which I think a lot of us are living in the freeze state right now.
Yeah.
Yeah. Just for a lot of reasons. And I think there's been a lot more talk about boundaries. I definitely see it more in my like clinical practice and the social media rise of setting boundaries and like no contact.
Yeah. I think the no contact and estrangement conversations are interesting and really misunderstood a lot of time. I mean, I love all Whitney Goodman's content when she runs the what's it called? Calling Home, the Calling Home podcast, and she has a group and everything like that. And I think her information is so good and she's so good at highlighting the nuances of situations. And she's not quick to be like, well, they did this right and they did that. It's very much of here's why that could potentially be right. Here's why people might potentially end up in these situations. Because the big takeaway I get from her is nobody wants to go no contact with a parent. We all want a parent who loves, understands, and accepts us. And that's not the reality for most of us.
Right. Right. Yeah. I think followed Nedra on Instagram
Yes.
for a long time.
Yes.
Also huge in the boundaries, multiple books on boundaries, like all of these things. And I think we have to be really careful that social media isn't the end all be all
Hmm.
for any conversation or mental health, but also just for how you show up in your life. Social media does not need to guide. Even though these Nedra is a professionals of Whitney Goodman, they are professionals in the field and highly respected, but that just because what they say doesn't mean that's what you have to do. Or just
Right.
because
It's just different.
30,000 people on
Different.
TikTok are going no contact, you don't have to do that.
It's more about, oh, can I find understanding? Does this person understand the situation I'm going through? Does that validate me? And then making decisions that feel right to you. Because your situation can be the exact same as somebody else who decided to go no contact or is experiencing some estrangement from their family. And that cannot be the right choice for you. And so, again, I think it's going into things with your eyes open, making informed choices, even if they're hard choices.
Yeah. What are some favorite techniques for boundary setting with difficult people? Can I just say something really quick? All of these, like the question box only gives you so many characters on Instagram. And the fact that I can like decipher these questions with the amount of abbreviations that are happening is truly impressive. I feel very proud of myself right now.
Say the question one more time.
Favorite techniques for boundary setting with difficult people?
I feel like I need more.
That's all there is. We'll have to take it up with the resilient social worker, Amanda,
Oh,
who also does a lot of work on boundaries. And we've had a lot of good conversations with that. But I think I'm not sure there are like specific techniques. I think if we wanted to break it down and give listeners like a really easy way to explore boundaries and steps on how to put boundaries in place and maybe enforce them, we could do that.
yeah, because my immediate thought was like, my sassy self was like, go no contact, block them.
Like just disregard this entire podcast.
Just do nothing healthy and just cut them out. Yeah.
Yeah.
No, but in all reality, like, and at multiple different points in my life, there are situations where the best decision for me was to go no contact with people who should have been very important in my life. And the healthiest thing for me, even if it was misunderstood by the people around me, was to go no contact, working through that estrangement and then hoping the relationship moves forward from there. And I jokingly say go no contact. It was helpful for some perspective in some of my situations. I also continued to be like really diligent about these people that I know that I had to go no contact with at some point in time, in terms of the amount of communication that I have with them, the amount of time I spend with them, the notifications that I'm getting via text, email. Only getting those sent to me at certain times of the day helps my nervous system just to know I'm not going to be surprised with something from these people who have been less than optimal for me.
Yeah. And I think no contact doesn't have to be a permanent thing,
Right.
which I don't know if I'm not on TikTok anymore. I'm not really like super, super active on social media. I don't know if that's like what's being put out there is that no contact has to be this all or nothing kind of thing, or that you do it for a really long period of time. I do think there are some instances where it can be healthy, like you're saying. And I've had a no contact period in my life with some family members. And sometimes you just need to fully step back to get the clarity and do what's best for you in those situations.
And I did a lot of work on myself and
Yeah.
understanding kind of the world that I was living in and navigating during all of those times when it's been no contact. It hasn't been like
Right.
no contact is the answer for things. It's just the reduction in variable to allow me the space to figure out how to navigate it before adding the complexities back in. I think so. I would say no contact is a tool actually, now that I'm like talking through it a little bit.
Yeah. And I feel like talking about it more can be really helpful too around processing the thoughts of like, why are you considering a boundary? What is
Mhm.
happening that is making you feel some type of way that you want to do something about it? Is it is a boundary necessary even? Is it a conversation that you can just have with that person? Maybe it's not, maybe it is, but does it have to be as do you have to go from zero to boundary right away? Or is there a step-by-step process that you can go through before you get there? Because I think, like we were talking about, boundaries don't feel good. Nobody wants to have to do them. What were you going to say?
It's a great question.
I don't know either. Let's see if any other questions came through this morning. Maybe I should start posting these right away in the morning. Hey, no more questions. Any final thoughts on boundaries?
I want to know what the hardest boundary you've ever had to set was.
Oh man.
Put you on the spot.
I think we've had some conversations about this and it's for sure been with my mom. I think particularly after my dad passed away, it was just a really hard doesn't even begin to describe it. I don't even know the words to describe that period of time. And grief is just such a beast that nobody can ever prepare you for. And as I've gotten older and processed the loss of my dad on my own and have been through some own life experiences, I've had to like remind myself that she likely hasn't done the same,
Mhm.
which oftentimes make my boundaries a lot harder to enforce, going back to that. But I think, like you said before, like I I would love to have a mom that is involved and active in my life, and that's not the case. And I've really spent a lot of time in therapy, like coming to terms with that and knowing that her relationship with my daughter will be different and all of these moving pieces. And my husband's always, "Are you doing okay with that?" I'm like, "Yeah, it's okay. I'm working through it every day, and some days are harder than others, but that's by far been the most difficult." You?
Oh gosh. I just feel like my life has been like a series of hard boundary after hard boundary. Even since I was a kid, my parents were divorced, and I truly believe in the goodness of fit between parent and child. And I knew even at a young age that one parenting style really didn't work for me. And advocating and setting a boundary for what I needed as a child was like deeply looked down upon. And I still deal with the memories of people telling me that, hey, look what you're doing to all these people. Look how you're hurting all of these adults in your life, like telling that to a child. And there's COVID boundaries that happened during COVID and how that still deeply impacts a lot of the relationships I have now because people didn't understand or didn't want to understand, couldn't understand, however you want to phrase that, why my boundaries were what they were. And after losing my daughter, how I expected people to treat me and the things I was willing to put up with and not put up with after gaining a lot of different perspectives during COVID and the loss of my daughter. I don't know. It just feels, I don't know. Who's next? Who am I next setting a hard boundary with? It just get in line. I don't know.
Yeah. I think one of my therapists told me, she's at the end of the day, you get to be happy.
Mhm. Yeah, we have to live with ourselves. And
Right.
so, like, setting these hard boundaries while people around me didn't like it and were open about not liking it and were in open defiance and not supporting of the things that I knew were right for me. And they might have tried to gaslight me and whatever, but man, I got a fighter inside of me because I knew what was right for me. And I knew that people being upset with me is a way better situation than me hating myself.
Right. Right. Maybe that's where we close on boundaries. Where can people
Fair.
find you?
I am most active on Instagram and TikTok, but I'm also on Threads, Facebook. My website is great too. Head over there, subscribe, join my email list.
Okay. Redbird Counseling.
Redbird Counseling, yes. Oh my goodness. I'm really bad at the whole self promotion thing. RedbirdCounselingMN.com, Redbird Counseling MN on social media handles.
Guys,
That's me.
we'll link it all in the show notes. Any final thoughts or anything you want to leave the listeners with?
Find a way to value yourself. Find a way to believe that you're worth that boundary and you're worth that fight with maintaining it.
Yeah. Beautiful advice. Thank you for being here today.
Thanks for having me back.
Oops. What do I stop this?
Thank you for listening. I hope you enjoyed today's episode. If you want to learn more or follow either of us on social media, you can find more information in the show notes. Thanks for your support and listening, and I hope you have a wonderful day.